He said it so easily, like a fact carved into stone, that I owed him my life because Mom had saved him, as if gratitude could be inherited like blood. The words hung in the stale air of his kitchen, thicker than the smell of burnt coffee. I remember standing by the doorway, the suitcase beside me, realizing that for years I had lived as a repayment plan for someone else's wound. He thought I was ungrateful for wanting distance, for needing silence, for not worshiping the version of our mother he kept on an altar built of guilt. But I wasn't leaving because I hated him. I was leaving because I loved him too long in the wrong direction. Like watering a plant that only grew thorns. The letter in my pocket trembled with every heartbeat, the ink still drying. It wasn't an apology. It was a goodbye. I'd driven all night, headlights carving lines through the fog, replaying his words in my mind like a broken sermon. You owe me your life. It wasn't a plea. It was a sentence. Our family had always been built on those, not conversations, but verdicts. I remembered being small enough to believe that love was a kind of debt, that Mom's sacrifices had stamped interest rates on our souls. Maybe he still believed it. But as the miles grew between us, I realized something quieter. The moment you stop owing someone, they stop recognizing you. The letter sat on the passenger seat, folded twice, the edge damp from my palm. I'd written it in one sitting. No edits, no pauses. Words came like a confession and a rebellion at once. I told him I loved him, but not enough to keep pretending. That Mom didn't save him. She trapped him. And through him, she kept trapping me. Every time he said I owed him, I heard her voice echo through his. Leaving wasn't betrayal. Staying would have been. He used to call me his mirror. Said we were the same, that no one else could understand the kind of love that bruises quietly. Maybe that was true once. But mirrors can crack without warning. I still see him that way. A reflection I used to recognize, now distorted by all the things we never said out loud. The last time I looked into his eyes, I didn't see family. I saw captivity wearing a familiar face. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sun had fully risen. I parked near a field and watched the light crawl over the grass like forgiveness. No one asked for. I thought about burning the letter, about calling him, about going back. But the quiet felt sacred. I realized I didn't need him to understand. Freedom isn't about being forgiven. It's about finally forgiving yourself for staying too long. He was 12 when the fire happened. I was 9, watching the world burn through the slats of my bedroom door, frozen by the sound of our mother's screams. The smoke reached me before courage did. Later, she said she saved him first because I was safe. That word clung to me like ash. Safe meant unseen. Safe meant unchosen. The story hardened into family gospel. She ran into the flames twice, once for him, never for me. And for years, he carried that like a crown. Maybe that's where the owing began. Not in gratitude, but in survival's uneven weight. People called Mom a hero. But heroes don't need witnesses. They need believers. She never spoke of the fear, only the glory. Every photo afterward showed her holding him close, like proof of her purpose. I learned to stand beside, not between. Every birthday candle, every family dinner, I watched them orbit each other, leaving me to trace the empty light between their paths. Years later, when the scars faded and the house was rebuilt, he started repeating her words, "Mom saved me." It became his prayer, his armor, his reason to be right about everything. If I disagreed, he'd remind me. She risked everything for me. Maybe he needed to keep that story alive because without it, he'd have to face the guilt of knowing she didn't run back for me. And maybe I needed to believe she would have, if the smoke hadn't been so thick. When Mom died, the story didn't. He took her words and made them commandments. You owe her everything. he said at the funeral, voice shaking not from grief, but authority. I remember staring at the closed casket and thinking how heavy silence feels when it's carved from devotion. She'd built him from guilt, and he kept building the same altar, this time with me as the offering. After the funeral, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and said, "We're all that's left." It sounded like a promise, but it was a chain. I drank because I didn't know how to refuse. In that dim living room, surrounded by old photographs and her fading perfume, I realized we'd never escaped the fire. We just rebuilt it. In smaller rooms, with quieter flames. He called the morning I planned to leave. His voice was soft, almost kind, the way it used to be before guilt grew between us, like mold. "You're really walking out?" he asked, pretending not to hear the suitcase zippers in the background. I said I needed air, space, peace, all the words people use when they mean freedom. He laughed, that hollow sound that made every room colder. "After everything Mom did, after what I gave up for you," the silence afterward wasn't empty. It was packed tight with history, the kind that never dies quietly. I told him I wasn't running from him. I was running from the version of myself he kept alive. The girl who apologized for existing, who mistook pity for love. "You're twisting things again," he said. I never asked for this, but he did in every way that mattered, in every unspoken debt, every quiet manipulation. I realized he didn't want forgiveness. He wanted ownership. He told me Mom saved him from the fire because she saw something worth saving. The words cracked something open in me. Not anger, but clarity. Maybe she did save him, but she also taught him to believe his life was proof of her goodness. He wasn't protecting her memory anymore. He was protecting the myth that made him matter. And I, by leaving, was shattering both. For the first time, I didn't argue. I just listened. The way his voice trembled between accusation and fear told me everything words couldn't. I realized he wasn't my enemy. He was just a man who never learned another language besides guilt. When he finally said, "So, this is it," I whispered, "No, this was it. Years ago." Then I hung up, and the quiet that followed wasn't cruel. It was clean. I sat in the car for a long time before starting the engine. The letter was still in my pocket, heavy with unsent words. I thought about leaving it on his porch, but that felt like keeping one foot in the fire. So instead, I opened the window and let the wind take it. Paper dancing into the pale sky. Maybe he'd never understand, but that wasn't my burden anymore. I wasn't leaving him behind. I was leaving the version of myself that believed staying was love. The road felt different after the letter was gone. Quieter, wider, almost merciful. For the first time in years, my thoughts didn't sound like him. They sounded like me, shaky, but mine. The world outside blurred into gold and gray, the sky yawning open like it had been waiting for this moment. Every mile I drove was a kind of exhale, every passing sign a reminder that leaving isn't running. It's choosing to stay alive somewhere else. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew what I was leaving behind. The mythology of owing, the inheritance of guilt, the illusion that love and debt were the same thing. I stopped at a small diner off the interstate. The waitress poured me coffee without asking, and for a strange moment I almost cried, not from sadness, but from the simple grace of being unseen. No one here knew my story, or his, or hers. I was just another traveler between destinations. The anonymity tasted like peace. I watched the rain bead on the glass, realizing how beautiful ordinary moments could be when they were rent-filtered through someone else's expectations. I thought about Mom again, how she used to hum while cleaning, a tune that sounded both sad and proud. Maybe she wasn't trying to make him feel chosen. Maybe she was trying to make sense of her own survival. We were all fragments of that night, shaped by what we thought it meant. She saved him. I saved myself. Maybe that's how cycles end, not by rewriting the story, but by walking away from it. That night, I dreamed of the fire again. Only this time I didn't wait behind the door. I walked straight through the smoke, found the little girl I used to be, and told her she didn't owe anyone for being saved. She looked up at me, soot on her cheeks, and smiled like she already knew. When I woke, my pillow was damp, but my chest felt lighter. Maybe healing isn't forgetting. Maybe it's remembering differently. At dawn, I stepped outside the motel and watched the first light spill across the wet asphalt. Everything smelled new. The kind of new that comes after ruin. I didn't think of him, or her, or even the letter. Just breath, air, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't punish, doesn't accuse. For the first time, I wasn't anyone's version of salvation. I was just someone who survived. The first apartment I rented was nothing special. Peeling paint, thin walls, the hum of someone else's television through the night. But it was mine. Every creak in the floorboard, every light flicker belonged to me alone. I unpacked slowly, like I was introducing myself to each object again. A single plant on the windowsill, a coffee mug without cracks, silence that didn't ask for explanation. It wasn't joy yet, but it was the soft hum of becoming. Sometimes healing sounds like nothing at all. I started painting again. Something I hadn't done since before the fire. At first, I didn't know what to paint. My hands felt foreign, like they'd forgotten color, but soon, shapes began to appear. Smoke, water, the outline of a door. I realized I wasn't painting the past. I was painting exits, versions of myself that finally walked away. There was no message, no moral, just motion, creation without an apology. Some nights I still heard echoes. His voice, her voice, my own. But they didn't control the air anymore. They were ghosts, learning to fade. I found myself talking to them sometimes, not in anger, but in gratitude. They had shaped me, and now they were letting me go. Freedom isn't the absence of ghosts. It's learning to live where they can't follow. One evening, I got a message from him. Just a single sentence. I found your letter. My hands shook, but not from fear, from finality. I didn't reply. The version of me who needed to explain was gone. I closed my phone, stepped outside, and let the evening wind wash over me. The world was still turning. So was I. The next morning, I drove to the ocean. The water was cold, clear, infinite, nothing like fire. I stood there barefoot, waves licking at my ankles, and I thought about everything that had burned and everything that had survived. Some debts can't be paid because they were never real to begin with. I whispered goodbye to no one in particular, and the wind carried it away. For the first time, the world felt quiet, and the quiet loved me back. Time moved differently. Once I stopped counting it in apologies. Days weren't measured by what I'd lost or owed, but by the small, ordinary things I could finally notice. Sunlight shifting on the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own laugh sneaking out when no one was listening. Healing didn't arrive like thunder. It came in whispers, in the way I no longer flinched at my own reflection. There was no grand revelation, just the quiet truth that peace is a practice, not a prize. I started volunteering at the community center downtown, teaching kids how to paint. Their laughter filled the room like fresh air. One girl asked me why I always drew doors. I told her, because sometimes walking away is the bravest kind of love. She nodded like she understood more than most adults ever would. Watching them paint, unburdened, I realized I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was building something new entirely. Some nights I still dream of him. Not the way he was when I left, but the way we were before the fire. Two children chasing each other through the backyard, laughter echoing between trees. I don't wake up crying anymore. I wake up grateful. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just gives it a place to rest. One afternoon, I drove back to our old street. The house was gone, replaced by something newer, smaller, safer. I stood on the sidewalk where the porch used to be and closed my eyes. No ghosts came. No voices whispered. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the faint rhythm of my heartbeat. Steady, certain mine. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. That night I lit a candle on my windowsill, not for mourning, but for memory. The flame flickered softly, small and calm, nothing like the fire that started it all. I whispered their names, his, hers, mine, and let the silence hold them. Sometimes love means letting the story end. Sometimes it means realizing it already has. I blew out the candle and watched the smoke drift upward, thin and weightless, like forgiveness finally finding its way home. If I could write him one more letter, I wouldn't talk about the fire. I wouldn't talk about Mom. I'd tell him about the ocean, how the waves sounded like breathing, how standing there felt like forgiveness disguised as water. I'd tell him I finally understand what he was trying to protect. Not me, not her, but the story that made sense of the pain. We all build cages out of meaning. I just decided mine didn't have to lock. I used to believe freedom meant never looking back, but now I know it means looking back without losing yourself. The memories don't hurt the same way anymore. They hum softly, like background music in a room I've already left. I can visit, but I don't have to live there. That's the difference between running and healing. Sometimes I imagine him reading that old letter. Maybe he's angry. Maybe he's sad. Maybe he finally understands that love isn't something you can collect like debt. I hope he does. But even if he doesn't, I hope he finds peace. Because I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself go free. There's a strange kind of grace in starting over without an audience. No one clapping, no one forgiving you, no one keeping score. Just the sound of your own breath and the choice to keep going. I still talk to Mom sometimes. Not out loud, just in thought. I tell her I'm okay now. That the fire didn't take everything. It gave me the courage to step through it. If I've learned anything, it's this: love is not debt. Gratitude is not obedience. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave before the house burns down again. I used to think survival meant endurance, but now I know it means release. The letter I never sent was never for him. It was for me. Proof that I was worth saving, even when no one came running. And that's enough.